So there we go. We're now live on YouTube. So hello YouTube, hello everybody that's on there. So I'm Kevin Smith from Seaward. I'm category manager for test and measurement at Seaward, and I'm joined by my good friend here, Tim James. Tim's representing PATA here today. Hello, Tim.
Hello YouTube, and hello Seaward. Yes, good to be here.
So we're really looking to get Tim here. It's something we haven't done before on this stream. We haven't had actual guests on there. Normally you've got the Seaward staff. So we've got Tim's joined us. Tim's here from PATA, and we're going to be talking a little bit about PATA and what they do in a moment. So first things first, thanks everybody for tuning in. Hopefully there's a few of you out there. One thing to be aware of, there is a bit of a delay between us talking and what actually gets out on YouTube. It's about a 20-second delay. So if we do look to be a bit disconnected sometimes, just be aware that there is a bit of a delay in there. Obviously, we've got the chat window there, so we can see your chats coming through, and we're starting to get a few questions in there. So Safe Electric Nationwide Limited says hello. Hello, Safe Electric Nationwide. So we're getting a few people out there, obviously, and we've had a question already in from Steve, and we'll get around to that later on. So yeah, please feel free, type into the chat box. It's always great to get the questions there, and this session always works really well. The more questions we get, the better. So with that said, we're going to get started. So first thing then, Tim, really, obviously you're here representing PATA. Do you want to just tell us a little bit about who PATA are?
Yeah, definitely. Thanks. So PATA, it stands for Portable Appliance Testing Trade Association. And I suppose the clue's in the name, really. That's what it is. It was originally set up in 2013 as a chap called Richard Eyre and myself and a few others. We were a little bit dismayed about what we saw happening in the PAT testing industry. I'm sure everybody will be aware. There's a big problem with a lot of companies out there charging very, very low prices for PAT testing and not doing the job very well. There's a lot of very bad PAT testing out there, and people who do the job properly and want to charge a decent amount of money were sort of struggling to make a go of it. So originally we set up just as really a Facebook group, just as a group of professional PAT testers who wanted to sort of work together to kind of improve the reputation of the industry, to try and sort of share good practice and raise standards. And as I say, we've been through a few sort of incarnations. We've had people leave, people join. We started with a very small membership, but it's grown. And about 2 years ago, we decided to sort of move it forward onto the next step, which was taking it sort of from a networking group into an actual proper trade association. So we've set it up as a proper trade association. We've got articles of association, etc. Richard and I are still the directors of the business that sort of runs it, if you like, but we've now got a steering group, a committee of 6 other people, and we meet up a few times a year to discuss what we're doing. And it's all about raising standards. It's about sharing good practice. And what I always say is we don't regulate the industry. That's not something we're into at the moment. It might happen in the future, but we do represent it. And so we're at the stage now where we're involved in, I go down to London regularly, or at least before the lockdown happened anyway, and meet with government, representing the PAT testing industry with the government have a new department called the Office of Product Safety and Standards, and we work quite closely with them. We talk to trading standards, and there's a whole load of stuff going on around electrical safety, and it's just a question of just trying to make sure that PAT testing is represented. And then obviously on a more local level, it's still about sharing good practice. We have a very active Facebook group where members can come on, and unlike just about every other Facebook group out there, it's friendly, and we share advice readily amongst ourselves, and we sort of generally promote the industry. So that's really where we're up to at the moment. We've got about 96 members at the moment, but it's growing all the time.
Yeah, I think it's really great to see what you guys at PATA have been doing lately, and I think there does need to be more voices for the industry from that side of things. I think it is a really important thing that the industry, and this is what we try to do at Seaward, and obviously, organisations like PATA as well. We forget that the PAT testing industry is quite small. There's quite a
Mm.
sort of quite a niche community really from that side of things. And actually, if we're not out there promoting the industry and we're not there trying to sort of trying to push things forward, then it's really difficult actually to to get things done and get changes there. And I know, Tim, you've been on the IET committee for the fifth edition, as I have, and trying to
Very
actually
much so,
get the
yeah.
changes there and represent the industry
Mm.
from that side of things. So it's important to do that. Just tell us a little bit about what's your role at PATA, Tim.
Okay, so I'm standards director. I mean, Richard and I sort of divided the roles up between us. Richard sort of deals with the day-to-day admin, and I sort of concern myself more with the standards. So we have a set of working standards, which at the moment is a voluntary code. So if you sign up to be a member of PATA, then you agree to work by the working standards, and it covers basic things like making sure you do the job properly. Different to the code of practice from the IET, which is very focused on the technical side. We think of the working standards as being more sort of about professional standards. So the way you run your business, the way you interact with your customers, the way you sort of present yourself, and just doing the job properly. And, we want to, I think we already are there actually. If you put a PATA sticker on your van, or if you put a PATA logo on your website, then customers will know that they're going to get a good service. And we want it to be like a badge of honor, if you like, so that, if you're a PATA member, then you should be proud to say, yes, okay, we're in this industry that has suffered a bit of reputational damage over the years. But if you use us to do your PAT testing, you know that you're going to get the job done correctly. You might not necessarily be the cheapest on the market. You're not going to undercut the sticker jockeys, as we call them. But if a customer books a PATA member to do their PAT testing, then they know that they're going to do the job right. I mean, I know there are plenty of people who aren't members of PATA who do a good job, but then there are companies that are not members of PATA that do a terrible job. And as I say, it's about sort of trying to push that forward. And again, you asked about sort of my specific role, and one of the things that I've always particularly pushed PATA to do from my own role within the organisation is I've always felt that it should be about trying to educate the customer rather than trying to bash the people that don't do it properly. A lot of people get in touch with us and they say, well, we need more legislation, we need PAT testing to become law, and there's all kinds of areas around that we could look into. But I genuinely believe, and have done for a long time, that if the customer knows a little bit about what's entailed, and the customer knows that you can't test a computer whilst it's running, for example, all kinds of crazy stuff we hear. You can't, you just magically wave an iPhone over a suite of office equipment and then go around and put stickers on it. The crazy stuff that we hear all the time. And if the customer has a little bit more knowledge of what PAT testing is all about, then when they do put the job out to tender and they pick the lowest price and somebody turns up and isn't doing the job right, then that person doesn't necessarily have to be an expert in PAT testing, but if they can recognise that this guy that they've paid 40 pence an item for isn't doing the job right, then at least we stand a chance of somebody else coming along and saying, well, look, we're PATA members, we'll do the job right. And generally, we hope that we can raise the standards in the industry. So that's what we're doing as well. So it's about raising standards, but it's about educating people as well. So, not just, the PAT testing shouldn't just be a piece of paper that you get. You pay some money out and you get a piece of paper to say your stuff's been PAT tested. It should be something that means something. It should be a case of, yes, we've had our equipment PAT tested professionally, and therefore we can be, as sure as we can be that it's going to be safe when we use it.
I think that's an important point, Tim, actually, because actually educating the duty holders, educating the users, all of that side of things is actually a really important part of it. Because, again, we in the industry know more about PAT testing and we talk with PAT testers all day long, but it's actually getting that message out there and spreading that wider. And I think that's an interesting approach that PAT are taking there to try and actually get more education to the end users, to the end customers. And I think that's a great point really from that side of things. So no, it's really good
Definitely,
to see what PAT is doing,
yeah.
and having more voices in the industry, I think, is really, really important.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that we often talk about amongst ourselves is, if you booked a painter to come and do some painting in your house, and they made a really terrible job of it, you don't have to be an expert in painting to be able to tell that they've made a complete mess of it. If your car doesn't work and you take it to the garage and they don't fix it, then you know that they haven't done it right. It's obvious. You don't have to be an expert on car maintenance, but you know that there was something wrong with it. You take it to the garage and there's still something wrong with it. If you pay somebody to do your PAT testing, the only difference between after PAT testing and before PAT testing, the only difference is that everything's got a sticker on it. But you don't know whether or not the person that did that PAT testing has done the job correctly. They've opened every plug, they've checked every fuse, they've plugged whatever needs plugging into a tester and tested it properly. They've done the right tests at the right time. You don't know that. They could have just gone around your office and put stickers on everything when you weren't looking. And so there is that sort of suspicion. And, a lot of our members tell us that, they go into workplaces and people say to them, why are you unplugging it? Why are you opening the plug? The last person didn't do that. And so that's why I think the education message is so important. And as I say, you made a point a minute ago about it being a small industry, and it is, but it is a vital industry. And the people that are in the industry are working hard and doing a really vital job. And you look at the accident statistics and you work out how many people get electric shocks in the UK as opposed to other countries that don't do PAT testing. And then you think, well, yeah, this is worthwhile activity to do.
I think that's it. Oops. Just clicked the wrong button there. I think that's it's a great point really, Tim, because I think what we are doing in the UK, it does show, sometimes it gets taken for granted, but actually if you look at where the electrical safety is, and particularly workplace safety and things like that, it does show what we're doing is working and how important the jobs are. Just going on to the comments there, if I just go back onto the two-person view there, there's just echoing your points really there, Tim. Safe Electric Nationwide Limited has commented on here, just saying that they recently looked at a set of reports from a national PAT tester, and it was just an Excel pass sheet basically, so a spreadsheet with just pass in there.
Right, okay.
And again, they've said, they could have put it together in 10 minutes. There's no real traceability from that side of things. And he believes that they're actually testing for 12 pence an appliance. So again,
really?
It's just echoing, really the reason for PATA and what we want to try and achieve really is to try and get around that, because it's just, it is worrying when you hear these sort of stories.
Yeah. I mean, traceability is an interesting one because, I think you do need to have that ability to go back and say, well, yes, I did test that piece of equipment at that particular moment in time and it passed and these are the results or whatever. I mean, I suppose it comes back to what I was talking about a minute ago about being professional. It might well be the case that the customer literally just wants a piece of paper to say that all their equipment's being PAT tested, and the customer is king, I suppose. I don't want to get into a situation where PATA is saying you must present the results in this way, you must use this particular PAT tester, you must use that particular process. But on the other hand, we do want to be able to say to people, you must do the job correctly, and there are certain minimum standards that you should adhere to. And certainly, if the customer is expecting a lot of detailed information about what tests are being carried out and what the results were, then that's what you should provide. Definitely, that's just down to professionalism. But yeah, I mean, it does scare me a little bit when you hear of people paying 12 pence an item for their PAT testing. But then you think, well, where's the responsibility there on the duty holder? That's the
well, that's always been my argument there, Tim. Really, with that side of things.
Yeah.
It looks like my camera's frozen, so you'll just have to put it with my voice on this one.
Oh, really? I can't see anything, Kevin. All I can see is me at the moment.
It's one of those things where really the duty holder, if somebody had bought, say, a 12 pence ladder, or that sort of thing, and if somebody had an accident, then generally, you know, you'd look at it and say, well, that employer's negative.
Yeah, definitely. Oh, I can't hear you at all now, Kevin. Can you hear me?
Ah, right. I can hear you, Tim.
Right, so I can't actually hear anything at all now, Kevin.
Ah, right. Give us a check on that. It looks like I can't see there's any change in the system there, Tim. So it looks like everything's working. I don't know if you can see on that at that end. Can you hear me, Tim, at all? Can you hear me now, Tim?
Hi, Kevin. Can you hear
hear
me?
me at all?
Hello. I hope this YouTube video isn't just going to be 10 minutes of me going, hello, can anybody hear me?
It could well be at the moment. Let's just see on that.
Are you there, Kevin?
Tim? Can you hear me, Tim, at all? It looks like we've lost Tim. Looks like we've lost Tim. We always get technical difficulties. We always get technical difficulties on these. So I'll just try and get Tim back there, and we'll see what we can do from that side of it. So yes, you've got me talking at the moment. Unfortunately, my microphone's there. As long as you can hear me, that's the important thing. Yeah, I don't know. Tim couldn't hear me from that side of things, but I will endeavour to get Tim back momentarily, and we will see what we can do from there. But I'll try and carry on from that side of things. So yeah, I'll see what we can do to actually get this back up and running, and we'll get Tim back with us momentarily for that. Otherwise, you're going to hear me carrying on. We always get some interesting things with our live streams. We always get some interesting stuff with the live stream. So yeah, we'll keep going and see how we get on with the session. So try switch it off and on again. Yeah, I think you're probably right there. I think that's a good one there. Dear, I'm just going back to see if we can get Tim to join back in again. If not, I'll pick up the comments and we'll carry on there from that side of things. So I've just sent Tim a new connection there, so we'll see how he gets on with that. So let's just have a look at the live stream while I'm doing this. Hopefully you can still hear me from that side of things. Yeah, Tim's just posted on there. Send me another link. I have sent you another link, Tim. So hopefully from that side of things you can join us, and we'll get started again. So just having a look at some of the stuff that's on there that people have been posting on here for now. If I just go to my presenter plus that, we can see a little bit of the stream in there. So let's just name check a few people that's in there. Hello, Alan. I recognise Alan on there. Alan Parkinson from my Friday webinars that we've been doing. I also can send you another link, Tim. So hopefully.
Hello.
Hello, Tim.
Am I back?
You are back, but you're not on the screen. So I'll just get you positioned where we can see you. Put it that way round. So we might have to just do a little bit of manoeuvring to get you in the right position for everybody. But I'm sure we can manage that. Right, Tim, you are back. Can you hear us okay now, Tim?
Fantastic. I'm sorry if I
don't know what happened then. Everything seemed to look fine this end, but it seemed to you just seemed to you couldn't hear us obviously from that side of it. So hopefully everybody, we've got Tim back. We've got Tim back for you, and we can start again. It's always something pops up. We've had a few comments on here, so I was just going down saying who we got on here. So I was just name checking a few people. So we've got Alan on here, Alan Parkinson. So I've seen Alan attended on our live streams, and we'll answer Alan's question a bit later on. Obviously, Safe Electric Nationwide Limited, name check them. Dialogue, I don't know who we've got on there from Dialogue. Is it Dave? But we've got somebody on there from Dialogue's checked in. Julie Marshall, hello Julie.
Oh, hi, Julie.
Well-known member of PATA. We've got
Julie's on the
Tim
kitchen
James
house.
on here, so
Yeah. Yeah,
Tim's
that's
on
weird. I'm
there,
watching
and
myself with a 20-second delay now.
Alex on there, and
Nice.
we've got Tim. So great to actually get a load of people on there, and it looks like we're actually getting quite a few people tuning in. So hopefully, can you all hear us now? Somebody type in and just say, "Yep, you can hear us," and we're all back, and everybody's going there. So Tim Peak Pat, there you go. So is that not Tim Peak as in the astronaut? Is that? I'm assuming that's Tim at Peak Pat, not Tim the actual. So Dave from Dialos, but of course it's me. There you go. I was, it could be other people, Dave. So it's. I was speaking to Dave earlier on today, and I did tell him that we're on there. So yeah, Tim said yes. I don't know whether that's yes. It is Tim Peak the astronaut, or whether that is Tim from Peak Pat. I'm guessing that's Tim from Peak Pat. So more than happy to. Oh, Chris Moore's there as well. So yes, okay, all good. Everybody can hear us. Right, Tim. I think what we probably best do is move on with some questions. I know there's one that's close to your heart, and I know some people who've have a look on the Facebook forums. Actually, one that we'll just do quite quickly because I think this is one that's come up. You've had experience with lately, and you've been commenting on the testing of figure of eight leads. The testing of figure of eight leads, Tim. Do you want to have a chat to us about the testing of figure eight leads? Or the non-testing of figure of eight leads?
Yeah, okay. I thought this might come up. Yeah.
I chuck that one in because I thought you might like that one.
Oh, cheers. Thank you. Yeah, yeah. Next time you want me to do one of these, Kevin, remind me to say no. Yeah. I watch these discussions taking place late at night on Facebook, and I really try so hard not to jump in. But on this one, it just seems to be going around in circles, and it's just a real sort of bone of contention for me because we put PAT testing kits together. We sell them. I run training courses. People come on my training courses and they buy a PAT tester and they buy bits and pieces as well. And people phone up and they say, "Can you sell us an adapter to test figure of eight extension leads?" And you just think, no, and it's really hard, and you have to go through the whole sort of rigmarole of explaining. Or people come on the course and they say, "Oh, look what I bought. I bought it from a different supplier, and I got one of these. What's this for?" And
what is the issue, Tim? What's just back to the absolute basics? We're obviously we know what we're talking about on this because we've discussed this. I know we've discussed this previously, but just for laymen, for people who aren't up with the debate on this thing about figure of eight leads, what is a figure of eight lead and what is the adapter for?
Right. Okay. So a figure of eight mains lead is a two core cable that powers a class 2 appliance, and I suppose the issue is. Let me clear something up straight away because sometimes this confuses people. When I say you can't test it, I'm referring to the process of PAT testing as being a visual inspection followed by, if necessary, a test.
Yeah.
So when you say you can't test it, I don't mean you can't do the visual inspection. You definitely can, and you definitely should do the visual inspection on the lead. So I'm not saying just ignore it. I'm saying you carefully look at it. So you're going to open a plug. If it's a rewirable plug, you can check the plug very carefully. You can check it's got the right fuse in it. You're going to go all the way down the cable looking for damage. You're going to check the connector isn't damaged, etc., etc. You're going to do a full visual inspection on it. And the issue is you can't do an earth test on it because it hasn't got an earth wear because it's a 2-core cable, and you can't do an insulation test on it either. And the reason that you can't do an insulation test on it is because when a PAT testing machine carries out an insulation test, it joins the live and the neutral together, so there's no potential between them. And then it measures between those two and the outside. So it could be, if you're doing an insulation test on a class 1 appliance, for example, you've already got a connection to the case of the class 1 appliance via the earth pin. If you're doing an insulation test on a class 2 appliance, then you have to make a connection to the exposed metalwork, and that's why you put the clip on. That's why you use the flying lead. And so the two issues that people get confused about is you can't do an installation test on a Class 2 appliance that's completely made of plastic. In fact, you can't do an installation test on a Class 1 appliance that's completely made of plastic, because you've got to put the clip on something metal. And you can't do the installation test on a figure-of-8 mains lead because there's nothing to connect to. The only time that you could possibly do an installation test is if you had a Class 2 appliance that was powered by a figure-of-8 mains lead. So, for example, if you had, I don't know, a DVD player or a television that had exposed metal parts on it, then you could put the clip on the exposed metal on that piece of equipment, and you could do the installation test that way. But you can't actually do the installation test on the lead. And as I said, this is something that crops up time and time again. And I think the reason that it confuses people is because when electricians do installation tests on the wiring of buildings, then they do run a test, or they should run a test between the live and the neutral. And I suppose if you've got old cables buried in plaster in a wall, or maybe you've got cables up in the loft and you've got junction boxes that might be full of water, for example, then in that scenario, there's definitely a benefit in being able to carry out an installation test between live and neutral. But you can't carry out an installation test between live and neutral when you've got an appliance. So if you had a piece of equipment connected to your PAT tester and you did an installation test between live and neutral, you're basically going to put 500 volts into that appliance, which isn't going to do it any good at all. And so that's why the PAT tester joins the live and neutral together. And I think that's the bit that people get confused about. And you see people, they'll buy these adapters and then they'll run the sort of standard IEC. If they've got a Prime Test 100, for example, they press the IEC button. If they've got a back PAT, they press the power cord button, and it will instantly fail on the earth test. So the only other button they can press is the Class 2 button. And when you press that button, it joins the live and neutral together. And because it doesn't find the fault, it comes up as a pass. People think they've tested it, but in actual fact, they haven't tested anything at all.
So definitive view on here that for figure-of-8 mains leads, visual inspection only, no real test that we can do.
Yeah, exactly.
So hopefully we've put that to bed. Of course,
well,
feel free to look Tim up on Facebook and comment on his answers.
Oh, please don't say that, Kevin.
I'm sure we're going to get this, Tim. I'm sure we're going to get this, but
yeah,
it's good to just have that one discussed really, and just go through that. And get
okay
through there. So just a couple of other points on here. There's a couple of ones that we've got in advance, and then obviously I'll talk about some of the questions that people have posed, or if there's questions that have been posed in the chat. Functional checks. And this was one thing that cropped up after one of the webinars that I'd done on a Friday. People were asking about functional checks. And where does a functional check fit in the overall inspection and testing process? We've got visual inspection, we've got the tests, and then we've got the functional check. Now, sometimes people would call that a load leakage test. Sometimes people would call it a functional check. What's your take on a functional check? Where does it fit in? What is it?
Okay. Well, definitely, I think there is sometimes a benefit to being able to check that the equipment actually works properly. Apart from anything else, it's kind of embarrassing if you test a piece of equipment and it passes and you put a green sticker on it and then they plug it in and it doesn't work. That makes you look a bit silly.
Well, it could also, I mean, that could be a safety problem as well from that side of things. A piece of equipment that doesn't work could have an underlying defect, of course, that, is highlighted. So, I mean, from my view, it's one of those things where if you haven't seen it work, it's very difficult to actually say the thing's safe.
Well, I agree with that. I think like so many of these things, it has to be tempered with common sense, because there are certain scenarios where you could say, well, a piece of equipment doesn't actually work properly, but is still perfectly safe. The example I often talk about is maybe if you've got a computer that won't connect onto the internet properly because the network settings are all messed up, or if you can't connect to your printer because you haven't got the right driver installed, that computer is still safe. It's not much use to the person who's desperate to print something out. but it's still going to pass a PAT test.
I think that's a key point, Tim. I think we're checking the safe functioning of the equipment.
Yeah,
that's
definitely.
the key, as opposed to the detailed functioning of every aspect of it. We're looking at the safety aspects of it. Does the thing actually work safely?
Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I had a situation once where I tested a circular saw. It was a big old thing. It was a Class 1 circular saw. It was in a factory that made flight cases. And it passed the visual inspection. I mean, there was nothing wrong with it at all. From the visual that I could see, it was a 230-volt appliance. It had an ordinary 13-amp plug on it. It was quite high power. It had a 13-amp fuse in it. That was all fine. I checked the plug. I checked the cable. I checked the physical state of the appliance. There was nothing that I could see by looking at this thing. And then I plugged it into my PAT tester, and I carried out the earth and the insulation test, and it passed both of those tests with flying colours. The earth value was really low. The insulation was infinity, or nearest, damn it. And when before I gave it back, I thought, well, I ought to just check that this works. And I plugged it into the nearest socket, held it very carefully, and pulled the trigger. And I'm not a fan of power tools, I must admit. They always scare me a little bit. But and this was a beast of a circular saw. But as soon as it started up, the blade was just moving from side to side. It was shaking itself to pieces in my hand. And somebody actually came past, and they heard this horrible sound. And they went, "Oh, be careful with that circular saw. It's falling to bits, that." Now you tell me.
Yeah, that's just what you want to know, isn't it?
But I let go of the trigger straight away, but I had to wait for it to stop before I put it down. And I failed it straight away, obviously. It was quite clearly dangerous. Although, having said that, there was nothing on there to indicate I had a problem. I mean, they just realized it was knackered and put it back in the cupboard, waiting for somebody else to come along and try it. I mean, I learned a lot on that day, if you like.
I've had a similar story with the drill. It passed the visual inspections, it passed all the tests. Yeah. Turned it on, and black smoke starts pouring out the side of the things. Straight away. Yeah. It's that thing. But if I hadn't gone to the extent of turning it on, then we wouldn't know. I've just got a question, or Dialogue's just actually put a little question on here and said that they'd agree, Tim, and I would always say that you're checking the appliance is electrically safe. The fact that it doesn't work is to some degree irrelevant. I think as long as the safe parts of it work, that you've got the safe functioning on there. We've actually had a hello from Ukraine here.
Oh wow!
From Little Giant. So there you go. That's a record, Tim. You're obviously bringing in a crowd. You can come again.
An international audience, yeah. Just on that point.
Dave Barker's made a comment on here, Tim. I think he's twisting your tail a little bit on this. He said you should have done the nut up on the grinder.
Fair enough. Yeah, well, it was a circular saw, and but yeah.
Oh, the circular saw. Sorry, that was me doing that. Yeah,
don't worry. I mean, I can't see the comments as you know.
No, that's it. Yeah, unfortunately.
I'm looking at myself on the screen now, which is a bit weird. But that particular situation, I think the bearings were worn on that circular saw, and there was no real way to tell. But yeah, I mean, to be fair, that is a really good point, because I'm not an expert in power tools, and I don't think you have to be an expert in power tools in order to be able to PAT test them and check that they're safe. It has to be about common sense. And the thing is, if I was an expert in power tools, then the next day I might find myself in a tire depot where I'm testing a compressor.
Yeah, or scientific equipment, or all sorts of things.
You have to be an expert on all these things in order to check that they're electrically safe. And I don't think necessarily you do. It has to be down to common sense. I mean, if it was the case of you're in a place that uses air tools and they've got a big compressor, I'm not an expert on pressure systems. If there's something very obviously wrong with a compressor and there's obviously guards missing or whatever, then I'm going to pick that up. But somebody else would come along who's an expert in that area and might say, well, that safety valve isn't working properly, or that isn't correct, or that isn't correct. And you would bow to their sort of better judgment in that respect. And that's where I think, it has to be down to common sense. The other issue that I was talking about quite recently was many years ago. We did some PAT testing for the Forensic Science Service when they were in Solihull. I think it's all been privatised now. But we went to a lab, and there's all kinds of weird and wonderful machines in there, scientific experiments going on. Some of the equipment we couldn't turn off. I mean, we just weren't able to do any more than look at it and say, well, from a visual perspective, it looks all right, but it's an experiment that lasts 36 hours and we can't turn it off. That's just not allowed. And then other equipment, you're just not allowed to turn it on. So yes, I can open the plug and check it's got the right fuse in it. I can do the visual inspection. I can do the earth and installation test, but I'm not turning that machine on because I could put up somebody's murder trial if it's got evidence inside it or whatever. And in some cases, you go to places like that and they're very strict and they say, look, you must not operate the equipment. Or in other cases, if it's machinery, you might not be trained to operate it. You might need to hold special qualifications before you can turn it on. So it has to be down to common sense. And I think what I often find myself doing, what I teach people to do on my courses is just to ask. And if you're in a factory with a load of machinery in it, then you might go to the person who uses that machine on a day-to-day basis and say, does this work properly? And if they say, oh no, actually, it makes horrible screaming noise when it's on, or sometimes we do something and smoke comes out of it, then you have to use that information and report that back to the duty holder. That will probably be a fail in that case. But if the company are telling you that their machine works properly and it passes the visual inspection and it passes the earth and insulation test and possibly any other test like a leakage test you might do, well, if it passes that, then you're good to go. I think
I think it's a good point to say that having a good dialogue with the duty holder is always worth doing. Speaking to the person who's there, the customer, and just getting their take on things, because I think it does have to be borne in mind with a risk assessment. If you're not going to be actually performing a full sequence of tests on it, they need to risk assess that in. But if they've done that and they understand that the risk of you turning it off is more than actually the risk of not being tested, then obviously that's part of their risk process. And I think it's that collaboration with the customer, collaboration with the duty holder on these things that's really important part of the conversation.
I think this might lead us on to a different topic altogether, but it's probably relevant to talk about it now, because it's this idea that I always tell people that when you carry out a PAT test for somebody, you're providing them with a service, and it's different when you put your car in for MOT, because they are checking it against legally defined rules, and if your car doesn't pass the test, you're not allowed by law to drive it. And when health and safety inspectors go into workplaces, they go in there with the authority to close it down if things are that bad. And when we go into somebody's premises to do their PAT testing, we don't go in there with any authority. It's about us providing a service. So you own an office, it's got 200 computers in it, it's got so many kettles, it's got so many toasters, it's got vending machines, it might be a factory full of machinery or whatever. You want to know that equipment is safe, and so you employ someone to come and check it for you. And when we go in as contractors, we go in there to provide a service. We're checking it to see if it's safe, and then we report our findings to the client. We report our findings to the duty holder, and if the duty holder says, yeah, okay, thank you, that's really helpful, I can see 95 out of 100 items have passed, that's great, we'll carry on using them. There are a few fails, we'll get those sorted out. That's great, that's a good outcome. But I'm sure everybody watching has had that situation where you've gone into a workplace and you failed something because it's got an obvious fault, a toaster with a massive great crack in the side of it, you put a red sticker on it, you go back a year later and they're still using it. And if the customer decides that they're going to say, yeah, thank you for the advice, but we're going to carry on using it, well, that's down to them because it's their stuff.
Yeah, I think that's entirely right, Tim. I think it is. We're there, supporting the customer, helping the customer, and you know, it's always this one where people talk about, and I say, not trying to get sidetracked, but, you know, cutting plugs off things, or, you know,
Yeah.
you go in, you cut a plug off and all that. And it's the customer's equipment. You know, we haven't got that remit to go in. We can advise, we can notify, we can tell them, we can, you know, work with them on these things. But we haven't
Yeah.
got that. We're not going in as an inspector. We're not going in as a policeman. We're going in there as a paid consultant, effectively, to consult on the safety of their equipment. So it is important, and it's yeah, it's good to hear that we're on the same page with those ones, really.
Yeah, definitely.
I'm just going to pick up a couple of the comments that we've got in here, because I think it's probably a good time to have a look at that.
Okay.
Tim's put a question on here from Pete Pat. He's put any experience of testing in a dental practice, but worried about a chair that costs £20,000, an autoclave that are very sensitive. Should I be looking at testing like IT equipment at 240 volts? What's your thoughts on that, Tim? Testing quite expensive dental equipment. I would advocate, yes, you need to look at testing these in a very, very sort of safe manner, really, and a light touch approach is probably advised.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. I mean, I think this is one area where the visual inspection is your friend here. I mean, I'm not saying don't test it, but I'm saying, you know, test it carefully. You know, we've all had that situation where we're testing a piece of equipment and we're thinking, I'm getting paid £1.50 to test this. And if I break it, how many more items am I going to have to test before I've paid for it?
Well, in this case, Tim, it says 20,000 if it's the dentist chair. So
well,
yeah, it's gonna take a lot of time to get this paid back. So yeah,
that's pretty good maths there. So well done. But yeah, I mean, wow, now I know why my dentist charging me so much when I go and have a filling. But yeah, I mean, the thing is, it shouldn't really make a difference. I mean, it's always a bit scary when you're testing something that's valuable. But you know, I've tested in aircraft control towers, you know, airport control towers and things like that. And you think, well, okay, so this equipment is really expensive, but actually having it switched off for any longer than the absolute bare minimum is going to be a massive problem. And if I break it and the whole system shuts down, then that's going to be quite traumatic. So yeah, I mean, sometimes you do find yourself in these situations, but I think I would say, you know, the vast majority of people are using machines that carry out a low current earth test, and most people have got a machine that can switch the insulation test voltage from 500 to 250. Although having said that, I don't do that very often. But I think if I'm testing a £50,000 television on the wall of a conference centre, I might just do the visual inspection and leave it at that, rather than actually do a test. Just
and I think that goes back to the conversation we had earlier about talking to the duty holder about the strategy that they want, the customer, that the strategy that they want you to employ as well.
Yeah.
Important one. Julie Marshall's beat me to it, actually. I was just waiting to get I was just going to say on there, but Julie's just beat me to it and said in the comments, what about the dental chair? Would it be classed as medical equipment, and does it need testing differently? Well, part of our Seaward group is obviously Rigel Medical, and the PAT testing standards, or the electrical safety testing standards for medical equipment, is BSEN 60365. So under 60365, you might want to actually have a look at some of these things, particularly if there's any patient applied parts. So again, sometimes when you're in particular properties, you know, like a dental practice, there may be some of the equipment that actually falls under 60365 as opposed to the IET code of practice. So it is worth anybody who is carrying out testing in that area to just speak to the clinicians, speak to the duty holders in there, and just get an idea of what equipment you are dealing with. Because if there is any patient applied parts in there, then realistically you probably should be looking at something that's a bit above the normal PAT test. So I think that's definitely a good point raised by Julie there, and was just beat me to it basically from that side of things.
I mean, I would agree with that. Medical testing is not something I'm expert on, but yeah, certainly the bit about patient applied parts. If I see anything like that, I just don't go near it, because you know, you need specialists.
If anybody's after a guidance on that, have a look at our Rigel Medical website and have a look at our Rigel Medical brand, because they have got a lot of guidance on testing that type of equipment, and it would actually help you if you are going into that. Because the whole thing with applied parts, it can get a bit messy. You know, you look at certain beauty therapies, you look at tattoo parlors, you look at all these things that there is a lot of things that actually do cross over with that type of testing and could actually be classed as medical type equipment nowadays. So it is important just to cross over and be aware of those things. So I think that's an important one. Green Sparks Electrics has actually asked you, Tim, what's your stance on dust caps on industrial plugs that are snapped off, but in a dust/water-free environment? Very specific one, that one, but I'm guessing there might be a little bit of history on that one, but yeah.
I mean, I suppose, notwithstanding what we've said already, I think those sockets are meant to have a cover on, and if the cover's missing, then it's broken, so it's a fail. That would be my opinion.
I would have thought, if in doubt, I'd always aim that way. I mean, sometimes you've got to apply a little bit of common sense to some of the things where I always try and put myself, when I used to do training, I always used to put myself in this situation where I would think, if I was the customer and somebody said that to me as a fail, how would I feel? But I think that's wholly justified, really, in the fact that if it's not there, it's not in the condition it was meant to be. And how do we know that isn't taken into a different environment, that it isn't used in a different way? So I think you always, certainly from my side of things, even if you didn't fail it, I'd expect to see comments on there, and that it's actually commented and that it's raised with the duty holder, really, from that side of things. Because yes, it might not be an instant fail there and then as you're seeing it, but if somebody took that into another environment, then potentially there is a potential risk there that we could come across that's introduced. So I think you'd at least need to comment on that. But I probably echo Tim's thoughts in there that I'd probably fail anything like that, because if there's been enough force on there to knock the dust caps off and stuff, then potentially it could have damaged other parts of the plug and things as well. So.
Yeah, it's very rare that you actually go onto a building site and pass anything, to be honest. Because every 110-volt plug has been bashed
every 3 months.
Well, yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, I mean, the other thing is, I mean, you can actually do quite well if you have a boot full of plugs and sockets and you're willing to change them there and then, providing you're competent to do it, of course. Then you can turn a £200 job into a £400 job by carrying out all those repairs there and then. So that would be my suggestion. Get some sockets and change them.
There we go. This is an interesting one. I think this could be Mr. Richard Eyre. He's put on now, I've never come across a dental chair with a plug on. They've always been hardwired. Well, does PAT testing just cover things with a plug on, Tim?
God, you're testing my knowledge tonight, Kevin, aren't you?
I think he may have walked into that one, because in my view, it was there's a lot of things that aren't that aren't plug connected that still fall under the same regulations.
I think there might be something wrong with my camera again, Kevin. I'm sorry, I can't hear you at the moment. So.
We do go through this cycle, Tim. We do go through this cycle.
Yeah.
I don't know whether there is a time-related issue or something times out or what's going on with that.
No, I was kidding, Kevin.
Right. Thank God for that.
Yeah.
Don't joke with that one, Tim. As soon as IT issues is my biggest fear on this side of things. So yes, pretending deafness is fine on that side of things.
Yeah.
So
no, Kevin, you've asked a question, and I mean, we could do a whole webinar on this, I suppose. I mean, it's something that crops up over and over and over again, isn't it? And everybody's got an opinion on it. I think that if you go into the vast majority of workplaces where everything is connected via plug and socket and you are competent in PAT testing, then you can provide a very worthwhile, a very useful service to your clients. And I think the vast majority of people who carry out PAT testing as a job or carry out PAT testing in their own workplaces do so, and they test everything with a plug on it. And if things are hardwired into the mains, then I think it's perfectly reasonable to say, look, we've got a water boiler that's hardwired, we've got some wall heaters that are hardwired, and we need a an electrician to come and do those. I think that's perfectly reasonable. I also think it's reasonable that if people are competent in safe isolation and have the right kit to do the isolation tests, or isolation checks rather, and they have the right equipment to test the piece of equipment once it's been isolated and connected back up again. If they're competent to do that, you don't necessarily have to be an electrician to do that, but you have to be competent in safe isolation procedures. And if you can do that, then by all means do. But I don't think there's a definitive answer. I mean, you will meet lots of electricians who say that you have to be a fully qualified electrician before you can do PAT testing, because you might at some point encounter something that's hardwired. And then there are other people that just say, well, look, you go around an office, you test everything with a plug on it, but you leave the items that are fixed because it's more complicated to test them. And I don't think there is a definitive answer, but it comes back to the dialogue. It comes back to the common sense approach. If you've got a situation where there are some fixed appliances in the workplace, the duty holder needs to consider how they are checked. And if they're checked on the same frequency as the electricians come around and do the fixed wire testing, fair enough. If they're checked by the person who does the PAT test, that's fair enough as well. What you don't want to happen is for the electrician to think that they're bits of equipment, so they don't include them in the fixed wire test, and then the PAT tester to think, well, they're fixed, so I can't do it, and then they get left in the middle. That's what you don't want to happen. But as long as somebody's on top of it, then I think it's fine. But what I don't want to see is people doing a 1 or 2 day PAT testing course and then going into an office and then starting to take the front off fuse connection units and disconnecting items off the wall and putting plugs on them and plugging them into their PAT tester and winding them back up again if they're not qualified in safe isolation procedures, because that's dangerous.
No, I think that's entirely right, Tim. I think there's two things going on. Do they fall under the electricity at work regulations? Yes, they do. Do they, obviously, if they're in a place of work or used for work purposes? So yes, they do. The duty holder needs to consider them, but who tests that and how it's tested is really down to competency and what the duty holder decides and what their strategies are. So there's sort of two sides to that coin there, I think. I just wanted to get through a few quick answers if we can, Tim, on some of these, because we're starting we're getting quite popular on here. So it's it'd be good to just go through some of these and just try and answer some of the questions quickly. I'm going to answer one because there was one that cropped up earlier and I don't want to forget it because it was one that was relevant and it was a follow up. Because you won't believe this, Tim, but I actually got something wrong the other day. I actually got something wrong when I was doing our webinars, and I need to eat some humble pie. So I need to do that. So Alan Parkinson has asked me, please can I confirm that it is acceptable to test insulation resistance on a class 1 item with no exposed conductive parts by using a Prime Test 250 and the class 2 test sequence? Now, I said, no, it isn't, because in my view, if you actually tested it on the class 2 sequence, then it was using the lead rather than actually testing with the earth pin on the socket. And actually, it's applying the wrong pass-fail limit to it. And I said on our live stream on our webinar the other day that no, it's not acceptable to do that. It's not the way to do it. However, I did suggest that Alan contacted our tech support department, and our tech support department spoke to the principal design engineer who designed the product. The principal design engineer, Anthony, who designed the product, looked into the drawings, and actually, when the test is carried out, the insulation resistance test is carried out, the earth pin in the equipment under test socket on the tester and the test lead are actually joined together. So at that point, if you do the class 2 test on class 1 equipment, it will actually test down the earth path and highlight any insulation resistance faults. It will still apply the wrong pass-fail limit, the 2 megaohms instead of the 1 megaohm. However, because it's applying a higher pass-fail limit, actually in that case, then it's probably not unsafe to do so. So that is me giving you an answer for our specific tester that I have checked with, or our tech support have checked with the design engineer. I will not stand that up on any other products or any other PAT testers because I think there could be some differences in there. So my answer was, in my view, still technically correct. I wouldn't advocate using a Class 2 test for Class 1 equipment by routine. But in this case, Alan has said, can I confirm that it is okay on that one? And actually, under those circumstances, with all the caveats, however, you won't find that in the manual, and we won't officially say it's there to go, but we have actually looked at that, and it is in there as a thing. But what I am doing, I'm actually looking at some product updates, and hopefully we can actually just include a way of actually doing tests for equipment with no exposed parts. So I'm looking at actually formalising that, making that a bit more sort of official, shall we say. But Alan had pulled me up on that, and I needed to eat some humble pie, Tim. So thanks for allowing me the time to do that.
That's all right. That's a very interesting answer, actually. I would make a couple of points about that. As everyone here knows, I'm sure, I run training courses, and I use a whole range of different machines, including Seaward, but dare I say, some other machines as well. The BAT PAT, for example, I know it doesn't always get the best rap, but in some cases, I think it's a very useful piece of equipment. But it does have a button on it. It has two buttons for Class 1. It has a Class 1 metal and a Class 1 plastic button. And if you press the Class 1 plastic button, then it does carry out an installation test on the metal chassis by connecting to the earth pin. So I suppose, I mean, what you said makes a lot of sense to me. But you're absolutely right to say that not every manufacturer tackles it the same way. And if that works on a Seaward machine, that's great. But it might not necessarily work on other machines. And certainly, I suspect that what you said first time around, that would be the best answer you could give at that time, because you would expect that when a machine is carrying out a test on a Class 2, then it is going to connect to the flying lead when it carries out a test on a Class 1. You don't need to put a clip on because you've already got connection there, but it should connect to the earth pin on the plug. But I was going to pick up something else, because we've had lots of discussions in PATA about that particular issue, because when I teach people how to carry out PAT testing, I start from the beginning and I talk about the earth test and why you do it, and why sometimes it's called the earth continuity test, why sometimes it's called the earth bond test. I start off by explaining how it used to be done at 26 amps. And then it's, now I explain about how a lot of people now use machines that only do a low current test and the pros and cons of that. We talk about the ZAP test and how that makes the test a lot more reliable, etc. And then I talk about the installation test and explain what it's all about. And what happens when people buy a prime test, but it's exactly the same if you buy a Martindale or if you buy a Fluke or whatever, you get into this sort of habit of talking about a Class 1 test or a Class 2 test. And it's easy to sort of fall into that trap, because you've got a button marked Class 1, you've got a button marked Class 2. So people say, oh, can I do a Class 2 test on that? Well, you're pressing a button that is going to do a sequence. And the sequence is the test that should normally be carried out on a Class 2 appliance. So it shouldn't really matter whether the appliance is Class 1 or Class 2, because the button is, you press that button and it starts off the sequence. Now, obviously, if you press a Class 1 button when you've got a Class 2 appliance plugged into it, it's going to start off by doing the earth test, and that's going to fail because there's no earth. But I always think it's better to think in terms of what tests are actually going to be carried out when I press this button, rather than thinking of, oh, that's a Class 1 appliance, therefore I have to do a Class 1 test.
Yeah, no, I think it's entirely right. And I think understanding what happens when you press the button and actually what it's going to do before you press the button is important to what you expect, particularly if you've selected 500 volts or, or even live tests. I've had instances where people have selected a protective conductor current test, and they just, they've almost gone sort of, just into that switched off mode. And it's just going, yeah. And it comes up, do you want to turn it on? Yeah. And the equipment suddenly, you've got a grinder spinning round, or you've got a, people, it's always important whenever you do any sequence to understand the implications of what that sequence contains.
Yeah. That's probably something that we should have mentioned when we were talking about function checks, actually, because that is something that I always advise people to be very wary of, because if you've got a machine that is capable of powering up the appliance, you don't necessarily want it coming on while it's upside down at the side of you, usually at waist height on the bench, if it's an angle grinder or a circular saw, especially the one I described a minute ago where I should have tightened the nut up apparently. But something like that coming on can be really scary. I've seen people pull the guard back on a circular saw and put the clip on the blade because they get a decent connection there. And then you think,
I've seen it with drill chucks as well. That suddenly the thing spins round to a kettle element or that sort of thing. I've had loads of clips actually melted onto kettle elements and things like that. So
yeah, of course.
Yeah, it's a sort of quite a common one, that one. Right, I said we were going to go through some quick, and then we got carried away.
Okay. Sorry. I promised to be brief in my answers.
We've done the hour already, Tim, so we're actually well into overtime now. But never mind, we'll keep going for a little bit if that's good with you.
Yeah, I'm happy to carry on a bit longer.
So Craig Bamford from AccuTest has actually asked a question: how often would we advise a person undertakes competency-based training on PAT testing? So how often should they do course refresh and stuff? And he's put, especially with the fact that the 5th edition's coming up. So how often should people really look to be retraining? Is there a set period of time we need to, is there anything stipulated?
Nothing stipulated in the law, and I don't think it's mentioned even in the code of practice. I would love it if everybody had to come and do a course every couple of years. I have a couple of people who come on my course, almost like clockwork. Every couple of years they turn up. I also think I should think of some more jokes to sort of try and make it a bit different from the course I did 2 years ago. Although it does develop and change all the time. I think with the 5th edition, I think there's quite a lot, especially if you're running a PAT testing business, and your clients don't have that table 7.1 to fall back on anymore. And so understanding how to give good advice about frequencies to your clients would be certainly good. I mean, I would love it if people came on the course regularly, but I think, in all honesty, if you're doing the job all day, every day, and, if you're in something, if you're in PATA or if you in one of these Facebook groups where you can get some good information, if you're watching webinars like this and you're keeping your knowledge up to date, then you shouldn't necessarily need to go on another training course every couple of years. But I think, really what you're trying to do is you're trying to demonstrate professionalism, aren't you? And if it's 12 years since you've been on a course and there have been a couple of editions of the code of practice come out since then and the industry's moved on and you haven't really kept yourself up to date, then I think, you could potentially find yourself in a sticky situation if something went wrong. And I think keeping your training up to date just implies professionalism. So I'd always recommend that, but I think it would be wrong to say that you absolutely have to do training on a regular basis, because it's all about competency. It's all about.
Do PATA have any sort of minimum training requirements for membership or stipulation or anything like that for membership or not?
It's something that we've definitely talked about. We don't require people to have the Sydney Guilds qualification. And that, again, is another webinar. It's all right. We won't get into that now. But we recommend that people are competent. A lot of people in the PAT test industry have got very little prior knowledge, but some come into the PAT testing industry having retired as electronic engineers, for example. I do a lot of training for the BBC, for example, and these guys come on a course and they've got master's degrees in electronic engineering, and they come on my course and sometimes I feel like the one. I feel like the kid in the class sometimes, but I've got information about PAT testing that I can put across to them. But they lap up the information and they whiz through the practical, and you think, yeah, you're competent. You don't need to do another course unless something substantially changes. And so I think, it has to be down to common sense. It's not like there's some law saying that you have to have this qualification and you have to do a retraining or refresher training or anything like that. There are plenty of industries that do require that, but PAT testing is all about competence.
Yeah, I think that it is what it is. I mean, with competence, I think the key thing, people misunderstand competence, and competence is about the knowledge and the experience coming together, which I think is the important part.
Definitely.
And I think keeping your knowledge, the more training you've got, the more certificates, the more experience, the more recently experience. And like I say, I think it's that continuing professional development, keeping yourself up to date with changes, keeping yourself up to date with the latest information. I mean, one of the topics I don't think we're going to get time to talk about now, but one of the things we were going to talk about was sort of counterfeit and substandard equipment and things like that. And I think, you've almost got to continually be sort of getting that input about, product recalls and keeping an eye out for dangerous products notifications and all these sort of things, because it is a fast changing environment. And if you are working in the PAT sector, it is really, really important to keep yourself up to date if you're going to be considered to be competent.
Yeah.
I'm just having a look on here. We've got the chat's gone mad, Tim. The chat's gone mad. There's all sorts of stuff in here, so I'm just trying to pick out some questions on here. I'll just pick one out. And Alan Parkinson again has just come on here, and he's just put, for domestic ovens within rental properties which are built in, what's the acceptable practice? Visual only. So he's sort of talking about how do we address built-in appliances? Obviously, it's quite a difficult one to test, that built-in appliances.
Yeah. Okay. The quick answer is risk assessment. The quick answer is common sense. If you go into a rental property and there's a built-in kitchen and you strip it all down just to get to the plug on the brand new washing machine, and then you put the kitchen back together again, well, firstly, you're going to be in there all morning sorting it out. And secondly, if you do that 5 times over 5 years, you're probably going to cause a problem. And the chance of you causing a problem is going to be much higher than you actually discovering something wrong. So, you learn little tricks about being able to, check that the dishwasher is asked, for example, by measuring continuity between the case and...
That's what I was going to say, is point-to-point testing maybe. I know we talked about competence, but point-to-point testing is maybe an option that I'd point to there.
Well, exactly. Yeah, I was. Yeah, I mean, point-to-point. I mean, is that a Seaward term? Because I would just use an ordinary continuity tester. Or I'd use
effectively, it is just a normal continuity test between 2 probes as opposed to between the socket and a probe. So, yeah, I mean, it's something we've got on the testers, but it is actually, I mean, there's loads of people use other instruments for doing that.
Yeah, I mean, I sometimes use an 18th edition multifunction tester to do a continuity test between, so you can do a 200 milliamp continuity test between them. But then sometimes I use Apollo and do a point-to-point test, but it's the same thing. But I mean, that's you're kind of mitigating, I suppose, the situation, aren't you? You're sort of saying, well, look, in an ideal world, I would strip down the kitchen, I would have the dishwasher and the fridge, appropriate electrical tests. But if you genuinely can't do that, then I think you have to take a common sense approach.
I mean, I think if these things are installed properly and they're checked at the point of install, there's very little room for them to get damaged or get moved or dropped or the leads trapped and things like that. And I think I've always taken the approach that if there's additional mitigating factors like RCD protection and things like that in there as well, from a risk point of view, you can mitigate some of this. So doing good visual inspections, or like you say, maybe just confirming the earth there is probably not a bad strategy really from that as a sort of halfway house from a risk-based point of view. But I think that's, again, discussion with the landlord, discussion with the customer, and actually, risk-based approach, I think is what we'd advocate. And I think that's repetition from that side of things. But
definitely.
So I think at that point, Tim, I've got down some of the questions. There is others on there, and apologies for anybody who we haven't managed to get those on. You can always, if you want to, actually contact. Obviously, you can contact myself. I'm active via LinkedIn. Please, connect with me via LinkedIn if you want to actually get in touch and ask me any of these comments. Again, I'll point you to the Facebook groups and Facebook forums and things like that both Tim and myself are active on there, and you can use that as a good way of getting in touch with us.
We've actually got, as well, so I'm happy for people to connect with me if they want to. So.
There you go. So, please feel free to connect with Tim as well, and obviously connect through PATA from that side of things. Also, I just want to give a quick shout out to I'm still doing the Pat Refresher webinars. We're on week 7 now, so I'll be doing risk assessment. I'm actually doing a whole webinar on Friday morning on risk assessment. And then the week after, I think we're doing record keeping and documentation. So they're the last couple that's left in the series. All the other ones are live on YouTube now. So if you want to go back and have a look at all the different topics, the legal side of PAT testing, basic electrical theory, basic test, advanced test, they're all on YouTube now for you to check out and have a look at. So all of that lot is there. So please check those out. And one thing I'd just like to obviously big thank you to Tim for being my guest tonight. I think that's really added a bit to it, and I think getting those answers and things is really good to get that perspective of Tim's experience on that. Just a quick one, Tim. We did get some questions on here, and I think it might just be a good one for you to just give PATA a little bit of a plug. So if people want to join PATA, what's involved with that? How much does it cost? Where do they go to?
Okay, really good point. Well, do Google search for PATA. There is a clothes brand called PATA. We're not them, but yeah. I really should know the URL, shouldn't I? Richard will be swearing at his computer right now.
Richard may type it into the chat box if he's switched on and he's still awake.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
you
so
never know. Richard might type some stuff into the chat box. I'm waiting to see if it appears, but he may or may not.
I've found it anyway. It's pata.co.uk. So it's
pata.co.uk. It's a nice, easy one.
Yeah, fairly easy to do that. As I say, we have 96 members at the moment. It costs £50 a year, so it's £1 a week.
So that's not it's not a fortune for what you get, really.
Yeah. There are benefits to being involved. You get discounts off labels and discounts off calibration and things like that. A lot of people find that more than repays their membership. But I mean, sort of closing comment, it's not about, people don't join because they think it's going to transform their business. They join because they want to be part of a community that is trying to make a difference in our industry. And it's a sign that you act professionally, and that's what we're encouraging. So
yeah, I think it's a networking thing as well, isn't it, Tim, really, from that side of things?
Oh,
you've
definitely.
Got the contacts there.
Yeah.
You've got the questions you can ask. You've got the network of people there to support you. And I think for small businesses, especially nowadays, it's important for people to have that backup and be able to actually collaborate a little bit to help each other out. So I think that's really important from that side of things.
Sometimes we get criticism because people say, oh, well, you don't accredit your members, and we don't go and assess them like, say, NIC, EIC do. But then we charge £50 a year and not 400. And as I say, we don't currently regulate the industry, but we do represent it. And, we represent it to government, and we're trying very hard to improve the reputation of the industry, to share good practice and to raise standards. And that's what it's always been about. And, we've been going 7 years now, so we're doing all right, I think.
No, brilliant. I think it's great to see the the industry moving forward, and I think it'll be really interesting to see the next steps and where PATA can grow to in the next 7 years, maybe, from that side of things. So looking forward to seeing that. So in that case, I'll stop the live stream now. Thank you everybody for joining us. This video will be live on YouTube straight afterwards, including the bit in the middle where we lost the connection and went back in, and me freezing on the webcam and stuff. So it wouldn't be a Seaward live stream if we didn't have a problem. So from us, goodbye, and I'll just stop the live stream, and that's it. See you again next time.
Cheers.
And we're clear. So there you go.